Right. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. This is part two, as Callie mentioned, to understanding hiring and employment barriers for people with disabilities. So, in the first part, we focused a little bit more on diversity and inclusion in the hiring process. And this time, it's going to focus a little bit more on inclusion and diversity in the actual workplace itself once somebody with a disability or a barrier has already been hired. And I did want to mention briefly, as a reminder, I'm from Selections Career Support Services. So if anybody is unfamiliar with that, in case you hadn't watched the first webinar, we are a supported employment nonprofit. And so we work with people with a wide range of disabilities and a wide range of ages and help them secure employment. And I'm specifically from the Get Ready in Trades program. And so this program focuses on the trades. Obviously, it helps youth get into the trades. So I'm coming from the perspective of somebody with experience working specifically with trades workplaces and the hiring process to get into the trades. But I'm going to try to keep it a little bit more general, just so it applies to everybody and everybody gets something from today. Wanted to start with just a very brief recap. So, as I mentioned, we are a supported employment nonprofit organization. So, the services we offer are totally free to our clients and to any employers that we work with. We often provide employer support if people want help making their workplaces more inclusive and that kind of thing. So, that's a really good resource for anybody who is interested in making their own workplace more accessible and inclusive. Organizations like Selections or any other ones in the area often do that kind of thing, like work with employers and kind of help you find ways that you can improve your workplace in that way if that's what you desire. So always feel free to reach out if you're ever interested in that. But again, we work with people with disabilities and barriers that can be self-disclosed and undiagnosed. Um, so we don't request proof from our clients. They just have to be comfortable checking a box if they says they have a barrier or a disability. Barrier can also be like a woman trying to get into construction. That would count for us. Again, we provide support for employers to help them make their workplaces more accessible. And we also sometimes provide support to employers. Let's say if you hired somebody with a disability and maybe things weren't working out, there was some sort of issue, and you weren't really sure how to work around it, we would be able to come in and work with the employer and that person as well to try to help you come up with some solutions. And a big aim of our program is raising awareness. So, awareness about supported employment, awareness about the options for people with disabilities and the resources available to them, and also general awareness about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, it's really great for us to do this kind of thing. Helps us to achieve that goal a little bit. So, I wanted to talk about three of the benefits of inclusivity that I kind of wanted to focus on today. And some reasons that we usually talk to employers about and that kind of thing. The first one being trends towards inclusion. So, generally, Canada is trending towards wanting to increase inclusivity and diversity in workplaces. It's what people want. A lot of people prefer to support companies and that kind of thing that focus on making everybody feel included and that sort of thing. And it's also what the government wants. They're putting lots of policies in place. There's Accessible Canada Act. So generally the trend is towards increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we always say businesses don't have to embrace diversity, but those that don't might be the ones that don't flourish as much as one that does, because there are a lot of benefits to including all populations. Another one is working with people with disabilities fills labor gaps that you need. They can provide very valuable work and they can accomplish the same as anybody else, especially if we use accommodations and things like that. So we really want to avoid having conversations that talk about hiring somebody with a disability like it's charity or like you're hiring somebody with a disability because it's a good thing to do. there are a lot of real reasons that it is valuable, and they provide a lot of meaningful work to employers. And so that's kind of how we like to focus our conversations. Um, they're providing very meaningful work. And also, we want to focus on how the ability, um, how hiring people with diversity, like with diverse abilities, can increase the ability of your company to have different perspectives on a topic. So let's say that you have a team coming together to problem solve an issue. If you have a team of very similar people, they all might have similar unconscious biases, they might have similar perspectives on the world, and they might all kind of have the same idea of how to problem solve that issue. Whereas if you brought in people from different perspectives, different backgrounds, they'd have those different biases, and this would allow you to have a broader scope of the world. So, including people with disabilities can open up the door to just having a whole bunch of different opinions and perspectives, which can lead to better problem solving. So, this is a slide from the last presentation when we talked about 27% of Canadians 15 or older having a disability. This amounts to roughly 8 million people in Canada. So, the point of this slide is when we talk about those diverse perspectives, this is kind of the pool of people that you have to kind of increase the diversity of those perspectives. But it's also um, a market that you could be accessing by including people with disabilities, because people like to shop at places where they feel represented, or they want to work at places where they feel represented. So there's a huge amount of people here, and by including all of them in ways like hiring people with disabilities, you're accessing a lot more customers, you're accessing an untapped labor pool, and that's what we call them, as an untapped potential, a group of untapped potential. So, some ways that we can talk about increasing inclusivity in your workplace. One can be providing accommodations, and we talked a lot about that in the last presentation, but I also wanted to specifically talk about providing a safe space to ask for accommodations. It can be a really intimidating thing for people with disabilities to go into a workplace and tell them that they need extra support or an accommodation in some way because they might feel that they will be treated differently or potentially let go. It can be a scary thing, so it's very important to provide a space where people feel comfortable asking and they feel that their job will be safe if they ask for what they really need. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Another is leading by example or setting an example for your staff of how you expect somebody with a disability to be treated in your workplace. So you're showing your staff what is right or maybe what is unacceptable, and it kind of just makes the whole organization more inclusive in general, because then everybody's on the same page of how to treat somebody, and it can help make that person feel more included. And we'll talk a little more about that too. We'll touch on all of these points again. One is to provide training. So, providing training, we're talking about training for all staff, not just the training that a new employee would get, but there are a lot of resources out there that you could provide for your staff so they could have more information about disabilities and that kind of thing, just to increase their understanding and their knowledge of what it's like to work with somebody with a disability, or maybe the best way to do that. It's also important to provide support and time to grow. So, with people with disabilities, sometimes they need a little bit of extra support in the training process. Sometimes they need a little bit more feedback. Sometimes they require more patience. So, it's very important for employers to give them the time that they need, within reason, of course. But if they need a little bit of extra support in the hiring process, um, in the hiring process or in the training process, there are different resources and things that you could give them, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then lastly, just talking about making actual office spaces inclusive, and also how to have an inclusive environment in terms of events and meetings and that kind of thing that happen at offices. I wanted to mention briefly duty to accommodate. I'm sure everybody has heard about this. But it's the duty of employers to make sure that their workplaces are inclusive, because it can allow all workers to participate fully. So we like to talk about accommodations as something that kind of levels the playing field for people with disabilities and allows them to contribute to their workplace in a meaningful way. Um, I wanted to mention this because this is again a slide from the previous presentation when we talked about barriers to hiring inclusively. We mentioned that one of the big barriers was accommodations. So when you take into account that employers can sometimes feel maybe intimidated by the cost of accommodations, or by thinking that all people with disabilities are going to need accommodations, going hand in hand with the fact that they are legally obligated to provide those accommodations, that can be a pretty strong reason for some employers not to hire somebody with a disability. And so at our organization, we try to help employers work around this barrier by helping come up with cheap accommodations, often free accommodations, which we talked about in the last one. We talked about like checklists and timers, anti-fatigue mats, everything being $50 or under. Um, so if somebody needs an accommodation and an employer feels that it's too much of a financial burden, um, there are different resources like that, like an organization like selections that they could use. But there are also others like disability related employment supports. So DRES, I'm not an expert on this topic. So if you have questions specifically about this, I would definitely go to Alberta Works or something like that. Um, but what I wanted to mention with this one is this is a resource that is talked about often at selections because this is something that you can talk to employers about as a way to make accommodations less intimidating and more accessible to employers. So this DRES can provide supports in a variety of ways. Some can be job search supports and that kind of thing. But the one I wanted to focus on is potential cost sharing of accommodations with employers. So, in order to make this happen, you would need an eligible employee. So, they would have to be a resident of Alberta and legally entitled to work in Canada. They would have to be 16 or older, a Canadian citizen, permanent resident, or convention refugee, or they would have to be employed or intending to work soon, having a disability that is documented, permanent, or long-term, and creating a barrier to employment, education, or training. So if you're working with somebody with a disability who fits these categories, this is a resource that is available to them that would be able to benefit your organization or company. Um, Eligible employers would be private companies, not-for-profit organizations, and self-employed people. So if you have those two things, the employee can apply for the disability-related employment supports, and then, oh, sorry, just saw something in the chat. The employee can apply for those employment supports, and that can be something that can decrease the cost a little bit of whatever accommodation your employee needs. So that's something that's really great. I wanted to mention then some of the different workplace accommodations that somebody might need. So if you're going to use something like DRES, you're going to want to take advantage of that for the more expensive accommodations. But something that is very low cost that I didn't mention in the previous presentation, but wanted to mention this time, is the idea of flexible scheduling or transportation accommodations. So flexible scheduling is a big one that can help a lot of people with disabilities be successful in their jobs. So flexible scheduling we think of typically as job sharing, or we also think of banking overtime. Job sharing is a good one because, especially for people with disabilities, they often can't work full time, or at least some of them. And in the trades, so in the program that I work in, overtime work is often required and long hours, and that's often just not accessible for our clients. But a lot of our clients are really interested in working in the trades anyways. Or our clients might be on AISH, and they don't want to lose that support, and so they're not able to work full-time hours for fear of losing that. So, an option that we could sometimes present to an employer would be job sharing, where two part-time individuals do the work of one full-time individual. So they're working cumulatively the amount of hours that the full-time person would have worked, and they're being paid the same cumulative amount that the full-time person would have made. So it can be cost effective for employers, and it can allow two people with disabilities potentially to participate in the workplace. So that's a really awesome option. The other one was banking overtime. So often people with disabilities might need a little bit of extra time off, maybe for medical appointments. Maybe if their disability has bad days where they're not able to come into work, and often they don't have enough time off to actually accommodate for that need. So, something that we talk to employers about is banking overtime. So, maybe you let your employees work an extra hour per shift. Maybe there's a specific day a week where they work an extra hour or two or something like that. And instead of being paid overtime, they get to bank those hours and then use them to take the disability related time off that they might need. So it gives them the ability to have the time off they need without giving them extra time off that maybe other people don't have. Um, Another accommodation, this one's not necessarily related to scheduling, but something that can also be helpful is task swapping. So let's say you have an individual who is struggling with one portion of their job, just one task is tough for them, but they're doing really great at their job besides that. Sometimes you can implement a swap between that person and another coworker, and you swap their tasks, the one that's tough for the employee with one that's a little bit easier. So they're both ending up with the same amount of work, but with something that suits their skills. So they're able to work, they're able to contribute meaningfully in a way that makes sense for them. That's a really good option. We provide that, or work with employers to provide that somewhat often. One being with an employee we had who was cleaning in the school, and he worked with another cleaner. I think it was the bathrooms specifically were tough for him. There was something about them that he just couldn't get the hang of. And so, an option that we worked out was swapping the bathroom with another room in the school with the other custodian. And the custodian would handle the bathrooms, our client would handle whatever task he swapped for. They were both there for the same amount of time, but it allowed our client to work to his strengths. Transportation is also a really big barrier for a lot of our clients, especially in the trades. A lot of our clients with disabilities take public transport and often DATs, and especially in the trades, um, often job sites are around the city. They have to go to different places all the time. It's not always at one specific location. And so a way that we can help employers provide an accommodation if there's somebody that they want to work with anyways who maybe can't drive would be to suggest having a meeting location where everybody could start their day from and then organizing carpooling to the job sites. It's a very small change. You can find somebody close to them who's willing to give them a ride, and it allows them to do their job and contribute meaningfully again. Next, I want to talk about leading by example and setting a standard for all staff. So, here I want to talk about obviously treating somebody with a disability with respect and showing your staff that that's the way that you expect them to be treated. But also, I think that it's on a leader to take responsibility for making sure that somebody with a disability feels included, making sure that you're making an active effort to go and start conversations with them, see how they're doing, show the rest of your staff that that is the kind of behavior that you would like to see from them as well. And in a similar way, um, leading by example can also mean not doing certain things. One thing that can be common when working with somebody with a disability that you maybe are unfamiliar with is wanting to help them too much. Um, so if you see somebody with a disability completing a task and maybe you run over to help them because you feel like you want to provide them with a little bit of support, that can be very well intentioned and a kind thing to do. but sometimes that can kind of diminish the abilities of somebody with a disability because they might be perfectly able of accomplishing that task independently. But if you kind of take it away from them, they might feel unvalued or like they are not really doing meaningful work. And if you run over and take over and help with a task because you want to help that employee, other employees might see that you're doing that and think that they need to help with that job as well. And now the employee with the disability might not have that task as theirs anymore because they're always having help from the other employees. I hope that makes sense, but um, the point just being sometimes small things like that are well intentioned. Your aim is to help, but it can actually make somebody with a disability feel worse. Setting an example can also mean just making sure that somebody with a disability knows who to talk to if they need help, making sure that they know that you are somebody that they could reach out to if they want to talk about accommodations, if they do need help at work, making sure they have that space where they can ask for help if they need it. That's really important. This one I wanted to talk about communication amongst the team and how that can lead to a more inclusive environment for people with disabilities. So, this one I want to use an example of a client that I worked with. So, in our little pictures here, the guy on the left is our client, the woman next to him will be our employer, and the man on the right side is somebody on the job site that the client will work with. So in this situation, our client has epilepsy, and he was always very upfront about it and wanted to make sure that this was disclosed to employers because he understood that this could be a bit of a safety concern for employers. So whenever he went to interviews, he would always disclose, he would always have discussions about this with his employers, or with the interviewers. So he interviewed with a warehouse once, and the interview went really well. And he was hired very shortly after his interview. He had disclosed his disability. He had mentioned that he couldn't operate machinery or anything like that. And the HR representative that he interviewed with was willing to work with him, willing to accommodate if he needed it, and decided to hire him anyways. The client was ecstatic as he had had a really hard time finding a job because of his disability. Epilepsy is a really scary one to employers. A lot of them are intimidated by it and don't really want to work with somebody with epilepsy. So it was really exciting for him to find an employer who was open to it and willing to give him a shot. So he went to the job site. I think he worked for a few days. And he had disclosed to the HR person, so he thought everybody knew about his disability. So he decided on the third day to talk about it with his employer. So this being the man on the job site on the right. He had one discussion about his epilepsy with the employer, and although they had said that his work was really good and he was doing well, he was let go very shortly after that. And it could be due to other things, but this has happened with other organizations as well. Um, and so it just kind of shows that there is a need to have communication between the employer, being the HR representative, and the people on the job site that the person will be working with if they are open to disclosing. So I wanted to mention that. And then we're going to move on to disability trainings. So I briefly mentioned this before as a good way to make somebody with a disability feel more included. So disability trainings can focus on topics like different types of disabilities to help staff understand a little bit more about who they're working with and how it might be different to work with that person than somebody else. We can talk about accommodations, how accommodations can help somebody with a disability and help them understand the purpose. I think sometimes people can be a little bit confused about why some people are getting certain things and others aren't, but helping staff to understand that accommodations are a way to ensure somebody with a disability is able to contribute meaningfully and participate in the work. Another one can be how to respect different communication styles for people with disabilities. Often communicating with somebody with a disability can be very different than communicating with anybody else, depending on the disability. So if there's going to be somebody in the workplace with a specific disability and they're comfortable having that shared, it can be a really good idea for the staff to learn how to talk to somebody with that disability. It will make them feel a lot more comfortable and included in the conversations, and it can also make your staff feel more comfortable knowing how to speak with them. Another one can be respecting confidentiality and the importance of confidentiality, making sure that your staff know that they can't share what the disability is for the employee and that kind of thing. There's lots of different trainings on that one. And there's a bunch of others too, like why disability matters to business, how to create and facilitate inclusive meetings, how to interview a person with disabilities, or how to do a performance review with a person with disabilities. There's a resource called Work Without Limits, and they have a lot of those trainings, and there's a bunch of other ones as well. Um, so it's important to provide trainings like this. If you're working with somebody with a disability who is open about it and wants the rest of the staff to know, it would be nice for them to be included in these training sessions as well. So this way, they can see that the rest of the staff are open to learning more about them, are wanting to work with them, and it can also give them a chance to be included in the conversation. And if anybody has questions about it, they can answer them if they feel comfortable. It's a way to start encouraging engagement between the person with the disability and the rest of the staff. And just a really good way for everybody to increase their knowledge and their understanding of how working together is going to go. Then we have making the training process for a new employee more inclusive. So the training process can be adjusted in a variety of ways to support somebody who is just learning and has a disability. So one that I wanted to talk about was peer support. So sometimes something that we can suggest to an employer is that they assign somebody to kind of kind of like a buddy system. We assign a buddy to the person with the disability, and that's just somebody that they know, that they're familiar with, that they feel that they can ask questions to. So if there are any concerns that come up and their immediate supervisor's not around and they don't know who to turn to, they know that they'll have somebody there. That can be a good idea for some people. Another can be to alter the training material format. So this can be depending on learning styles. Often disabilities can involve learning differences. And so maybe you want to offer your training written, maybe you want to offer it auditorily, maybe a more hands-on approach is better suited. Another can be assigning an individual with a disability a very supportive supervisor and making sure that the employee knows that they can go to that supervisor if they need help. That's their contact person. That can provide a lot of comfort to somebody with a disability to know that they have that person. Altered training process. This can mean maybe giving them more time to learn the training if necessary. Again, trying those different training materials. And it can also include using a job coach. So this would be somebody like me from an organization like ours. In a lot of our programs, not so much the trade programs, but in the other ones that we have, a job coach will go to a client's first day, maybe first week, as long as they need them there to help them learn the job and feel comfortable doing it independently. So if you work with an organization like Selections or any other organization that offers this, it can be a little bit of extra support for a person to help make sure that they're getting the job and the transition to them working independently will be smooth. Another important thing is to provide feedback and the chance to improve to clients or to your employees. Um, this one I wanted to tell you a short client story again about a different client who worked at a car dealership. So this client was super excited again to have this job, and he made it to his 3-month performance review. So he was almost past his probationary period and super happy to be there. He loved it. He had his performance review and it was very, very positive. They said everything was fine, no concerns, nothing for him to work on. But very shortly after this performance review, again, he was let go. He wasn't given a reason as to why he was let go. There could have been other factors going on here, but he feels that he wasn't given the chance to improve, and it really bothers him to this day. He still brings it up and wishes that he knew what he did wrong so he could have worked on it. So I think that it's really important to provide that feedback to anybody, but especially to somebody with a disability who may not have work experience or know maybe the social norms of working in an office or in a professional setting. There can be some knowledge gaps and things that they just need somebody to talk to them about, and then they can improve. So I think it's really important to give them that chance to provide feedback and to let them know when something needs to be worked on. This client from this example loves feedback. Every time we work on anything together, he wants feedback because they want to improve. They want to get to be the best that they can be. It's really important to them. Okay, and then I wanted to talk about making the workspace more inclusive, physically and also in terms of events and meetings. So the physical workplace, it can help to try to limit distractions if possible. And this would depend on obviously what is distracting to a person with a disability. Um, One thing that I have heard from clients is that bright lights can be distracting. So if somebody is maybe sitting at a front desk under a fluorescent light that's bothering them, that can be distracting. So you can try one of those desk covers. It's like a shade that blocks the light out. That's a very small accommodation that would help somebody focus and feel more comfortable at work. Also having an accessible setup. So if they have a physical disability, maybe they need uh, a different workspace in some kind. Like maybe they need a desk that's accessible by wheelchair. Maybe they need a different type of mouse. Maybe they need to have their computer set up to just be auditory, like they can talk and it'll type for them. There are different things like that that can help somebody with a disability. Also, certain things like music can make somebody with a disability often feel a lot more comfortable. It can kind of block out the world and those distractions that make it hard for them, helps them to focus on the work that they're doing, and just provides a sense of familiarity and comfort. So, if they're at a job where they can have music and put in their earbuds, that can be a really good way to make the workplace feel a little bit more inclusive to them. Another one will be talking about events and meetings. So, a big thing for events and meetings is to invite and include everybody. So, make an active effort to make sure everyone is invited and everyone is included. Never want to obviously have a meeting that only that person with the disability is not invited to, even if you think that it's not interesting to them or something that they necessarily need to know. They shouldn't be the only one left out. Um, for activities and things like that, make sure that everybody is invited and don't choose activities that aren't accessible to the person with a disability. Um, for example, if you have somebody with a physical disability, like let's say they have a limb difference, maybe they're missing a limb, maybe they're not able to use their arm properly, whatever the difference might be. If you want to choose a team building activity, maybe it shouldn't be a sport, or maybe they shouldn't go bowling or something where they're required to use that arm because that's automatically excluding them. So it's just about being thoughtful and thinking about how you can include everybody. Another one is to allow participants to self-regulate. So let them take breaks when they need to take breaks. Let them stand up during a meeting if they need to, pace maybe if they need to. Sometimes we implement the use of fidget toys and things like that, just to let clients have what they need to feel comfortable. I think that sometimes meetings can be rigid on everybody sitting around a table for like 3 or 4 hours at a time. Sometimes we have long meetings like that sometimes, but to be inclusive to everybody, allow people to do that in a way that works for them. Okay. So again, I just want to make sure to mention that organizations like Selections or other organizations in the area can really help you with creating a more inclusive workplace if that's what you want to do. We can help with accommodations. We can help with brainstorming different ways that you can accommodate, brainstorming different ways that you could change tasks or help clients learn tasks or anything like that. We can provide on-the-job support to clients if they need it. We can help with any concerns that employers might have. We've had situations where maybe somebody doesn't understand the social norms of being at work and what's acceptable at work. We've had one who just wanted to be friends with everybody and tried to chat too much and didn't understand when it was not time to chat anymore. And an employer felt like they didn't know how to work with that client and didn't know how to change that. So we brought the client in for a meeting. We had a conversation about it. And at that point, they were able to understand it a little bit more and it kind of solved the problem. I think it took maybe some more support from the job developer that was working with them. But the point being that if there's ever an issue that an employer feels that they can't manage on their own or they're not sure that they know how to handle, there's organizations like us that can help. Same with modifying trainings. And to give you a brief example, um, we had a client working at a bakery. This is just a new client, but there was an ownership change at the bakery. The client had worked at this bakery for years before the ownership change. But when the new employers came in, they felt uncomfortable working with somebody with a disability simply because they didn't feel like they knew how to support him. So they cut his hours way back and they agreed that he could continue to work there if he got support from an organization. So that's how we got this client. He reached out to selections for this reason and asked if somebody would be able to support him on his job to help his employer feel a little bit more comfortable. So one of our staff goes to the bakery at 5:30 in the morning and supports him with his baking. And I say supports him as in he just goes there and the employer feels more comfortable having him there. Um, and knowing that they have that support, even though it's not really needed, it's something that has allowed the client to keep his job. It's something that made the employer feel comfortable letting him keep it. Eventually, we'll be able to fade out that support and the client will hopefully be able to just work independently. But it's a really great resource to use if you ever feel like you need help working with somebody with a disability, keeping your office accessible, anything you need help with. Next, I was going to mention a participant that we had. This client agreed to share his story and was fine to have his picture and his name shared. This is our client Wesley, and he worked at Baxter's Burgers. I was going to show you this as a video, but just for time, I think we'll skip it today. But Wesley joined the program. He was very set on mechanics, but his big barrier was not having a driver's license. That's super necessary to get into mechanics. So we did job exploration with Wesley to help him see some different options. I think we reached out to Baxter's Burger to come to a hiring fair that we were having. And it was at this hiring fair that he met Wesley. They began working together, and Wesley is now an apprentice chef with his restaurant. So that's just a really exciting success story of one of our clients, and a way that we were able to provide support both to Wesley as he looked for a job and also to Baxter's Burger. So that's a really awesome one, but I think we'll skip the video. Don't want to take too much of your time. We're almost at the end here, but I wanted to mention October is DEAM, which is Disability Employment Awareness Month. If you're attending a webinar like this today, you likely already know that and maybe already participate in DEAM events. But I wanted to mention that this is a really great opportunity to learn more about these topics. It can often be targeted at employers, organizations, self-advocates who just want to learn more about this kind of topic. And it's a really, really great event to attend if you are interested. Again, I will mention Selections also has a DEAM event going on, which is called the Untapped Potential Conference. So this conference, we talk about breaking barriers in the workforce. And it's a really great conference. It's actually only our third annual conference. It's going to be on October 2nd at the Fantasyland Hotel. We have some really great speakers lined up and a lot of people who are going to come and talk about all these topics in more depth and share their really great advice and opinions on how you can make your own workplace more accessible, inclusive, and diverse. So I would highly recommend checking out a Deem event, whether it's ours or another, but hopefully it's ours. Um, yeah, but that takes me to the end of my presentation. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that I was able to share some helpful information, kind of from the perspective of our clients. And if anybody has questions, I am happy to talk about them with you to the best of my ability.
Megan, that was great. I have so many notes written down. I'm sure
Awesome.
other people do too. Yeah. So like Megan said, we've got some time left here. If anyone has any questions, you can throw them either in the chat
Mhm.
or the Q&A function. So I'll maybe give people a minute to sit on and think about that. One thing I did want to ask is, do you have any recommendations for trainings that people could take or share with others that they work with? Just to have
Um,
maybe a few examples or suggestions.
yeah, there was the one that I was referencing there is called Work Without Limits. I could maybe even send you a link to that, Callie, if you're able to share that. Um, I can just find the website. I could even put the website in the chat so everybody has that. But that's a really good resource, and they have a lot of different, I think they're usually hour-long trainings, and I think that they can be virtual, sometimes they're in person. Um, I would recommend the virtual because I think it's actually based outside of Canada. But the content itself is great, and they have a lot of really good tips and tricks. So I will put the link to that in the chat.
Awesome.
All right, so that's that one. Oh, thank you for linking the DRES, by the way. That's a really good um, resource as well. If anybody is worried about the cost of accommodations, that's a good one to have. If anybody has any questions, happy to take them. If not, that's totally fine. Um, all of our contact information is available if people have any questions that maybe they want to send later. We're always happy to take calls. Oh, here's a question. There's some tips for employees who may find themselves working alongside individuals with disabilities, don't have decision-making abilities about accommodations. I would recommend trying to include that person as much as possible. So being a friendly face is a big one, but also maybe being an advocate. So if you notice that they are struggling with anything and maybe they don't feel they're able to stand up for themselves or talk about what they need, you can be somebody who speaks up for them or encourages them to speak up for themselves if that's what they need. Maybe you can provide them some help if there's anything they're struggling with at work. So that could be providing them with some advice about maybe how you would handle whatever they're struggling with. That could be helping them by talking to their employer about needing a little bit more support. Um, but ultimately, just treating them nicely, fairly, being a friend at work would go a long way and would really make a difference for somebody with a disability in a workplace, especially if you don't have that decision-making ability. You can always be an advocate. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We have two questions in the Q&A, so I
Mhm.
can read them to you, Megan, here. So the first question
Sure.
is, what is the minimum or reasonable percent of people with disabilities that should be in a company to make them feel that the company is inclusive?
I think it would depend a lot on the company itself, the size of the company, that kind of thing. I don't know if there's a minimum percentage per se that I would have in mind, but it's not necessarily about having people with disabilities to fulfill a quota or to make them feel comfortable. It's just for somebody with a disability to see that even one person who is like them is working at an organization can make a big difference. I have gone into businesses to look for jobs with some of my clients. They see, maybe I go with a client with Down syndrome and they see somebody else with Down syndrome. They get very excited about that. And they see that that is somebody that they could relate to, somebody who is achieving something that they want to achieve. So that is really encouraging to them. And it also, again, like I mentioned, makes them want to support that business, maybe shop there or use that service. So I don't know if there's a specific number that I would have in mind, but um, any bit helps. So hiring one person with a disability is already a great change and a great step forward.
And I think that goes with even if you think about the marketing or communications around your workplace or your job, I think it's important to think about the pictures and the videos you're using and having representation
Mhm.
in there too. If people can see themselves in that, then maybe they're more likely to apply. So I think that helps too.
Absolutely. That's a great tip. And having it listed on your website and in job postings and that kind of thing that you are an equal opportunity employer and you would like people with disabilities to apply is very encouraging to them and makes them feel very included as well. We talked about that in the first presentation, but just in case anybody missed that, that makes a big difference to people with disabilities.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. I don't see any more questions coming in. I don't know if we want to give it maybe one more minute, see if anything else comes out
Sure.
um, through the Q&A or the chat. But yeah, no, thank you for this great presentation, Megan. This was awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining. It was fun to talk to you all. It's something that I really enjoy talking about, and I hope that everybody, took something from this presentation and felt like they gained something today. But thank you for having me. I'm very grateful to be here.